Okay, now, let's be honest. Did you really mean it? Did you really mean what you were just singing? Just a few minutes ago, you sang those words over and over again. Do you remember what those words were? Let my tongue be silenced if I ever forget you. Let my tongue be silenced if I ever forget you. You said it, or you are singing it. Are you now guilty of perjury? So you meant it. So since you meant it, I don't have to give this homily. I can now go back to my seat. Because you see, the thing about it is that these words from Psalm 137 are words that have been here for centuries. They're words that we have repeated over and over and over again. And we could see that as these words came about in that psalm, the people of Israel who coined those words were persons who indeed were sitting away from the land that God had given them, because they had the experience of being in slavery in Egypt, and they had the experience of being in exile in Babylon. And they were saying that by the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered you. So they were hankering after God. That's what the psalm is saying. And God was the one who brought them back to their land. So they were brought back from the Exodus, they were brought back to the promised land, and of course, the remnant returned to the land of Israel after their exile. And so we have seen that. But we know that over and over and over again, people have forgotten the Lord. For this reason, the Lord sends prophets and all kinds of preachers to remind them. But we heard in our first reading that your messengers they have mocked. So it's not easy being a messenger of God these days. Neither was it easy back in the day. So it has never been easy, and probably never will be easy, because people will always want to do their own thing. Because Moses had that experience. Moses had that experience when he brought the people out of Egypt into the promised land. And the people constantly murmured against him and against God. And we can read about that in the book of Numbers. And as they grumbled against God, there was something that happened. What happened is that God sent serpents among them who bit them, and many of them died. You remember that story, don't you? And as Moses, as a leader of the people, he cried out to the Lord. He cried out to the Lord on behalf of his people. Because not only does a messenger of God speak on behalf of God, but the messenger also speaks to God on behalf of the people. And as Moses cried out to the Lord said to him, what you need to do then is to build or to make, a cross, so to speak, with this fiery serpent, the sour serpent. Put that on a pole. And then as the people look to that pole, to that serpent, they look at it and then they will find their healing. And it happened. And in today's gospel, we hear Jesus saying that just as Moses lifted up the serpent to the desert, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. So must the Son of Man be lifted up. And so we who continue to grumble against God and to grumble against the messengers of God, then we need to know that God still wills that we be saved. And God sent something better than the sour serpent. He sent his Son. He sent his Son, and he was lifted up high on the cross. And why did God do this? We heard that in our gospel reading. God did that for God so loved the world. That's why he did it. And that anyone who will look at the Son lifted up on the cross, they will be saved. And Jesus reminds us that God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world would be saved through him. And I think for this reason, so I hope that they're not going to disappoint me today, then later on we're going to hear our choir sing, "Behold the Lamb of God." Behold the Lamb of God. Behold him who takes away the sins of the world. So in other words, look at him. Because if you look at him, you will be saved. And when we find that salvation, when we have received that salvation, how could we forget? How could we ever forget? So truly, we can say after having seen, if I forget you, let my tongue be silenced. So I hope that when you come back next week, I'll still be able to preach. Because if during this week I forget God, I may be silenced. So God grant that we will never be silenced, but that we will always remember him. The same way that we're asking him to remember us, we want to remember him. And as we find ourselves living in this land of exile, sure, we will weep. We will weep because we remember him. And what we remember is that he loved us. He loved us, and he continues to love us, and he will always love us. And basking in that love, we will always proclaim the great things of our God.